For years, a priceless secret lay hidden in plain sight, disguised as an ordinary object. One woman's deathbed confession unleashed a mystery that would change a family's life forever. We all harbor secrets, little trinkets tucked away, forgotten memories, perhaps a hidden compartment in an antique desk. But some secrets are worth millions, and some are concealed in the most unlikely of places. This is one such secret. It began, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A dying woman's last, labored breath. Jenny Vostro, on her deathbed, clutched her nephew Carl Sabatino's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. Her eyes, usually bright with a quiet intensity, were clouded with the approaching end. "Carl," she rasped, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic beeping of the hospital monitors. Under the sewing machine, Carl leaned closer, straining to hear. He loved his Aunt Jenny. She'd always been a constant in his life, a quiet, somewhat eccentric presence, full of old-fashioned sayings and a surprising knowledge of obscure historical facts. He'd spent countless childhood afternoons in her cozy, slightly cluttered house, the scent of lavender and old paper always hanging in the air. Under the sewing machine, "Aunt Jenny," he repeated, gently squeezing her hand. "What's under there?" A faint smile flickered across her lips. The secret finally revealed, and then she was gone. The funeral was a blur of muted grief and awkward condolences. Carl, still reeling from the sudden loss, found himself back in Jenny's house, the silence amplifying the emptiness. The house was exactly as she'd left it, a comforting jumble of books, antique furniture, and half-finished projects. And in the corner, by the window overlooking the overgrown garden, sat the sewing machine. It was an old Singer, a sturdy, black machine with intricate gold detailing. Carl remembered the rhythmic whirring sound it made as Jenny worked, her hands moving with a practiced grace he'd always admired. He'd seen it countless times, a fixture of his aunt's life, as familiar as the worn armchair by the fireplace or the chipped teacups she used every afternoon. He knelt down, a strange mix of curiosity and trepidation swirling within him. What could possibly be under there? A hidden compartment? A secret message? He ran his hand along the smooth, cool metal of the base. Nothing. He checked the drawers, filled with spools of thread, needles, and scraps of fabric. Still nothing. He lifted the machine, its weight surprising him. Underneath, wrapped in layers of yellowed newspaper, was a painting. It was surprisingly large, almost awkwardly so, crammed into the small space. Carl carefully unwrapped it, his heart beating a little faster. He recognized the painting. It had always hung in Jenny's living room, a somewhat abstract piece with bold colors and sharp lines. He'd never paid much attention to it, dismissing it as another one of his aunt's quirky, old-fashioned possessions. He carried it to the window, the afternoon light illuminating the canvas. He examined it more closely, expecting, he wasn't sure what. A hidden message? A clue? And then he saw it. In the upper left-hand corner, a signature, scrawled almost illegibly, Picasso. His breath caught in his throat. He stared at the signature, then back at the painting, his mind struggling to reconcile the familiar, seemingly unremarkable artwork with the name of one of the most famous artists in history. It couldn't be, could it? A wave of dizziness washed over Carl. He sat down heavily on the worn floral armchair, the painting resting precariously on his lap. Picasso. The name echoed in his mind, a jarring dissonance against the backdrop of his aunt's quiet, unassuming life. He felt a strange mixture of disbelief, excitement, and a growing sense of unease. He looked around the room, at the familiar objects that had suddenly taken on a new, almost surreal quality. The faded floral wallpaper, the crocheted doilies, the collection of antique thimbles on the mantelpiece, all seemed to whisper secrets he'd never noticed before. Had his aunt, this quiet, reserved woman, been harboring a masterpiece all these years? And why? He examined the painting again, his eyes tracing the bold strokes of color, the sharp angles and fragmented forms. He knew next to nothing about art, but even he could sense a power, a raw energy emanating from the canvas. It was as if the painting itself was holding its breath, waiting to be discovered. He remembered vaguely Jenny mentioning something about the painting once years ago. He'd been a teenager, bored and restless, and had idly asked her about it. She'd smiled enigmatically and said, "It's a piece of history, Carl. A piece of someone's soul." He'd dismissed it at the time, chalking it up to his aunt's usual cryptic pronouncements. Now, her words resonated with a new, profound meaning. He spent the rest of the afternoon lost in a haze of bewildered speculation. He Googled Picasso signatures, comparing the one on the painting to countless examples online. He found articles about forgeries, about lost masterpieces, about the incredible value of even minor works by the artist. The more he read, the more his heart pounded in his chest. He needed an expert, someone who could tell him definitively whether this was the real deal or just a very elaborate, very old copy. He found the name of a reputable art appraiser in a nearby city, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, known for her expertise in 20th century art. The next few days were a blur of anxious waiting. He carefully rewrapped the painting, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something incredibly precious, something that could change his life forever. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The meeting with Dr. Reed took place in her sterile, modern office, a stark contrast to the cluttered warmth of Jenny's house. Carl felt out of place, clutching the wrapped painting like a lifeline. Dr. Reed, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper demeanor, examined the painting with meticulous care. She used magnifying glasses, special lights, and various instruments he couldn't even name. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Carl watched her, his heart pounding, his future hanging in the balance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Reed looked up, a flicker of something akin to awe in her eyes. "Mr. Sabatino," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Do you have any idea what you have here?" Carl swallowed hard. I think it might be a Picasso." Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "It is, and not just any Picasso. This is extraordinary." She went on to explain, in detail, the painting's provenance, its stylistic characteristics, its place in Picasso's oeuvre. She identified it as a work from his mention a specific period, e.g., Cubist period, Blue period, a piece that had been presumed lost for decades. Its value, she estimated, was astronomical. Carl listened, stunned, as Dr. Reed spoke. He felt a strange disconnect, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. $30 million. That was the figure Dr. Reed finally uttered, the number hanging in the air like a shimmering, impossible dream. $30 million, hidden under a sewing machine. The initial shock gave way to a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers, insurance agents, art dealers. Carl's life was suddenly populated by a cast of characters he'd only ever encountered in movies. The painting, now securely stored in a climate-controlled vault, became the center of a complex legal and financial dance. The media, of course, went wild. "Hidden Picasso found under sewing machine," the headline screamed. Carl's face, bewildered and slightly overwhelmed, was plastered across newspapers and television screens. He was inundated with interview requests, offers, and the unwanted attention of long-lost relatives he'd never even heard of. He navigated this new reality with a mixture of awe and trepidation. He sold the painting at auction, the bidding reaching a fever pitch before finally settling at a staggering sum, even higher than Dr. Reed's initial estimate. He became, overnight, a multimillionaire. But amidst the whirlwind of newfound wealth and fleeting fame, a persistent question gnawed at Carl. Why? Why had Jenny, a woman of modest means and simple tastes, hidden a masterpiece worth millions under her sewing machine? Why hadn't she sold it? Why hadn't she told anyone? He returned to Jenny's house, now his, the scent of lavender and old paper still clinging to the air, a poignant reminder of the woman he'd lost. He spent hours poring over her belongings, searching for clues, for any hint of an explanation. He found old letters, diaries, and photo albums, piecing together a fragmented portrait of Jenny's life. He discovered that she'd briefly studied art in her youth, a passion she'd seemingly abandoned for a more practical path. He found a faded photograph of a young man, handsome and debonair, with a cryptic inscription on the back, Paris, 1948. My heart's desire. Could this man be connected to the painting? Had Jenny acquired it in Paris? Was it a gift, a memento of a lost love? The possibilities were endless, each one more intriguing than the last. He found no definitive answers, only tantalizing hints and unanswered questions. He learned that Jenny had been fiercely independent, a woman who valued her privacy above all else. Perhaps she'd simply wanted to keep the painting for herself, a secret treasure to be enjoyed in solitude. Perhaps she'd feared it would be stolen, or that the knowledge of its existence would change her life in ways she didn't want. Or perhaps Carl thought there was a deeper, more personal reason, a secret buried so deep that even death couldn't fully reveal it. He realized that he might never know the full truth. And in a way, he found a strange comfort in that. The mystery, the enigma of Jenny's secret, became a part of her legacy, a testament to the hidden depths that lie beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. He used a portion of the money to establish a small art scholarship in Jenny's name, a way to honor her quiet passion and to give other aspiring artists the opportunity she'd never fully pursued. He kept a few of her belongings, the chipped teacups, the worn armchair, the old singer's sewing machine, tangible reminders of the woman who had, in her own quiet way, changed his life forever. The sewing machine, now empty of its secret, sat in the corner of his new, modern apartment, a silent sentinel, a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places, and that even the most ordinary lives can hold extraordinary secrets. The hum was gone, replaced by something quieter, something Carl couldn't quite identify, but something that felt, in a profound way, like closure. He had the answers he was going to get, and maybe that in itself was enough. The Paris photograph haunted Carl. The handsome man with the confident smile, the inscription, my heart's desire. It felt like a key, a crucial piece of the puzzle that he couldn't quite fit into place. He decided to investigate, to try and trace Jenny's steps back to that time, to that place, to that mysterious man. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Isabelle Dubois, specializing in historical research and provenance investigations. Isabelle, with her Parisian connections and her sharp, analytical mind, was the perfect person to delve into Jenny's past. The initial search yielded little. Jenny's passport, long expired, showed a single trip to France in 1948, a 3-week stay in Paris. There were no other records, no letters, no diaries specifically mentioning the trip. It was as if Jenny had deliberately erased that part of her life, leaving only the faintest of traces. Isabelle, however, was persistent. She scoured Parisian archives, tracked down old hotel registries, and even managed to locate a few surviving individuals who had known Jenny during her brief stay in the city. The picture that emerged was fragmented, but intriguing. Jenny, it turned out, had stayed in a small, bohemian hotel in the Latin Quarter, a hub for artists and intellectuals in the post-war era. She'd frequented cafes and art galleries, immersing herself in the vibrant cultural scene. She'd even taken a few art classes, her passion for painting briefly rekindled. And then there was the man. His name was Jean-Luc Moreau, a struggling artist with a rebellious spirit and a charismatic charm. He and Jenny had met at an art exhibition, a chance encounter that had blossomed into a passionate, albeit brief, romance. Isabelle found a few old letters exchanged between Jean-Luc and a friend, describing Jenny as his American muse, a woman who had inspired him with her quiet intensity and her genuine appreciation for his art. He'd even mentioned a painting, a portrait he'd done of her, capturing her serene beauty and hidden fire. Could this be the Picasso? Carl wondered. Had Jean-Luc somehow acquired the painting and given it to Jenny? Or had he painted it himself? A work so remarkably similar to Picasso's style that it had fooled everyone, even Dr. Reed? The investigation hit a dead end. Jean-Luc Moreau had disappeared without a trace in the early 1950s, his fate unknown. The portrait he'd painted of Jenny was never found. The connection between Jean-Luc and the Picasso remained a tantalizing, but ultimately unproven, theory. Carl felt a pang of disappointment, but also a strange sense of acceptance. He realized that some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. The story of Jenny and Jean-Luc, their brief encounter in post-war Paris, the possibility of a lost masterpiece. It was a romantic, enigmatic tale, a whisper from the past that would forever linger in the shadows. He decided to let it go, to embrace the ambiguity, to accept that the full truth about the painting's origins might never be known. He had the painting's authenticated value, the life-changing sum of money it had brought him. But more importantly, he had the story, the enduring mystery of his Aunt Jenny, the quiet woman with the extraordinary secret hidden under a sewing machine. And that, he realized, was a treasure in itself. The threads of the past would remain unwound, but their presence was enough. He was the keeper of the secret now,